The sound of a piano being tortured echoed through the marble hallways of the Ashford mansion. 13-year-old Sophie was at it again, hammering away at the keys with all the grace of someone trying to crack walnuts. Mrs. Victoria Ashford sat in her study, gripping her teacup a little too tightly as another wrong note pierced the air. $200 an hour for piano lessons? She muttered to herself. $200 and she still sounds like a cat walking across the keyboard. Victoria was what people called old money. Her family had owned half the city's real estate for 3 generations. At 62, she wore her wealth like armor, designer clothes, perfectly styled silver hair, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her husband had passed away 5 years ago, leaving her with more money than she could ever spend, and a granddaughter she was determined to mold into high society. The annual charity gala was coming up in 2 weeks. It was the event of the season, where billionaires gathered to write checks and feel good about themselves. Sophie was supposed to perform a simple piece on the piano, simple being the key word. But even that seemed beyond her reach. Victoria set down her teacup and walked toward the music room. She needed to have another talk with that expensive piano teacher. As she passed through the hallway, she noticed Rosa, her housekeeper, quietly dusting a vase. The woman worked like a ghost, always there but never in the way. Rosa had been with the family for 8 years now. She'd come to them after her husband died. A single mother desperate for steady work. Victoria paid her well enough, she supposed, though she'd never really thought much about it. Rosa cleaned, cooked occasionally, and kept the house running. That was the extent of their relationship. Rosa had a son. What was his name again? David? Yes, David. He was around Sophie's age, maybe a year younger. Victoria had seen him a handful of times when Rosa couldn't find childcare. The boy would sit quietly in the kitchen doing homework, never making a sound, never touching anything. Well behaved, at least. The piano practice mercifully ended, and Sophie came stomping out of the music room, her face red with frustration. "I hate this stupid piano," she announced. "I hate Beethoven, I hate Mozart, and I hate Mr. Harrison and his boring lessons." "Sophie, darling," Victoria began in that controlled voice she used when she was about to say something unpleasant. "The gala is in 2 weeks. The Hendersons will be there, the Blackwells, the mayor. I don't care about your fancy friend's grandmother. I don't want to play at your stupid party." Sophie stormed off to her room, leaving Victoria standing in the hallway, her jaw tight. The girl had no appreciation for the opportunities she'd been given. No discipline, no sense of responsibility. That afternoon, Victoria was reviewing some paperwork in her office when she heard it. At first, she thought someone had left music playing on a speaker somewhere. But no, this was live. Someone was playing the piano, and they were playing it beautifully. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, each note flowing into the next like water. It was Chopin. She recognized it from her own youth. Her mother had played that piece. But who was playing it now? Mr. Harrison had left an hour ago, and Sophie was in her room on her phone. Victoria followed the sound down the hall, her curiosity mixed with irritation. The music was coming from the old music room, the one they never used anymore. She pushed open the door quietly. There, sitting at the antique piano, was David, Rosa's son. His fingers moved across the keys with impossible grace. His eyes closed, his whole body swaying slightly with the music. He was completely lost in it, unaware of the world around him. For a moment, Victoria just stood there stunned. The boy was playing a piece that would challenge even advanced students. And he was playing it perfectly. Not just the notes, but the feeling behind them. You could hear the sadness, the longing, the beauty. Then reality crashed back in. This boy, the help's son, was touching her piano. Her family's piano. Without permission. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice cut through the music like a knife. David's hands flew off the keys. He spun around, his face going pale with fear. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm so sorry. I didn't think anyone would. This room is off limits to staff and their families. Do you understand what off limits means?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'm sorry. I just heard Sophie practicing earlier and I wanted to try." "You wanted to try? You wanted to try my family's antique piano like it's some toy?" Victoria's voice was cold now. "Where is your mother?" "She's upstairs cleaning the guest rooms." "Please, Mrs. Ashford, don't be angry at her. She didn't know I was here. I finished my homework early and—" "Go to the kitchen, now, and tell your mother I need to speak with her immediately." David practically ran from the room. Victoria stood there, her heart pounding with anger she didn't quite understand. How dare that boy? How dare he come into this room and play like that? When her own granddaughter, with every advantage in the world, couldn't manage a simple scale. 20 minutes later, Rosa knocked on Victoria's office door. The woman looked terrified, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm so sorry about David. I didn't know he went into that room. I've told him 1,000 times to stay in the kitchen when he's here. Please, I'll make sure it never happens again." Victoria studied the woman before her. Rosa was 42 but looked older, worn down by years of hard work and harder circumstances. She needed this job. Victoria knew that. The power dynamic was crystal clear. An idea began to form in Victoria's mind. A cruel idea, perhaps, but an effective one. "Actually, Rosa, I have a proposition. Sophie refuses to practice adequately. She has no motivation, no drive. Perhaps if she saw what a child from different circumstances could achieve with dedication, it might inspire her." Rosa's confusion was obvious. "I don't understand, ma'am." "Your son will attend Sophie's piano lesson tomorrow. He'll play something, show her what real dedication looks like. Maybe seeing someone her own age who actually appreciates the opportunity will motivate her to work harder." Relief flooded Rosa's face. "Of course, Mrs. Ashford, thank you. Thank you so much for not firing me. David would be happy to help." After Rosa left, Victoria sat back in her chair. She told herself this was about motivating Sophie. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to examine too closely, she knew the truth. She'd seen that boy's talent. She'd heard it. And instead of being impressed, instead of being curious, she'd felt something else entirely. Threatened. A 12-year-old boy from nothing, with no lessons, no advantages, no opportunities, could play circles around her granddaughter who had everything. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. And Victoria Ashford wasn't going to celebrate it. She was going to use it to motivate Sophie. That was all. Just a tool. Just an example of what hard work looked like. She picked up her phone and texted Sophie's piano teacher, Mr. Harrison. "Tomorrow's lesson. I'm arranging for another child to demonstrate a piece. Please prepare accordingly." Outside her window, the sun was setting over the city her family had helped build. Inside, Victoria Ashford convinced herself she was doing the right thing. Tomorrow would be interesting indeed. Rosa barely slept that night. She kept replaying the conversation with Mrs. Ashford in her mind, looking for hidden meanings, searching for signs that this was more than it seemed. Rich people didn't just forgive mistakes. They held on to them, used them as leverage. At breakfast, she watched David eat his cereal, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. He knew something big was happening today. "Remember," Rosa said quietly, "be polite. Say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. Play whatever they ask you to play, then sit quietly. Don't speak unless spoken to." "Mom, I know," David said, but his voice was small. "Do you think Sophie will hate me?" Rosa's heart clenched. "Why would she hate you?" "Because her grandmother is using me to make her feel bad. That's what this is, right?" Sometimes Rosa forgot how smart her son was, how much he noticed. Just play your best and be yourself. That's all you can do. At 3 o'clock, Rosa brought David to the grand piano room. She cleaned this room 100 times, but today it felt different. The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows, making the black piano gleam. Sophie was already there, slouching in a chair, picking at her nail polish. Mr. Harrison, the piano teacher, stood by the window, checking his watch. Then Mrs. Ashford walked in, and the whole room seemed to get colder. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than Rosa made in 6 months. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor as she settled into her usual high-backed chair in the corner. "Thank you for coming, David," Mrs. Ashford said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Mr. Harrison, this is David Rivera, my housekeeper's son. He's going to demonstrate something for Sophie today." Mr. Harrison looked confused. "I wasn't aware we'd have a guest student today." "It's not a lesson for him," Mrs. Ashford said sharply. "It's a lesson for Sophie. She needs to see what dedication looks like. David has been teaching himself piano, haven't you, David?" "Yes, ma'am," David whispered. Sophie looked up from her nails for the first time, actually studying David. He was wearing his school uniform, khaki pants, and a white polo shirt that was starting to get too small for him. His shoes were scuffed. Next to Sophie in her designer clothes, the difference was obvious. "Play something," Mrs. Ashford commanded, waving her hand at the piano like she was swatting a fly. David's hands were shaking as he sat on the piano bench. Rosa stood by the door, wanting to run to him to protect him, but knowing she couldn't. This was his moment. She just prayed he wouldn't freeze up. David closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then his fingers touched the keys. The room exploded with sound. Not just notes, but emotion, raw and powerful. David was playing Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, one of the most technically demanding pieces ever written. His hands flew across the keys, attacking the dramatic chords, then softening for the gentle middle section. Every note was exactly where it should be. Rosa saw Mr. Harrison's mouth fall open. The teacher's hand went to his chest like he'd been struck. Even Sophie sat up straight, her phone forgotten on her lap. But Rosa couldn't take her eyes off Mrs. Ashford. The woman's face had gone completely still, like a mask. Only her fingers moved, gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. When David played the final crashing chords, silence filled the room. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Then Mr. Harrison started clapping loud and enthusiastic. "Extraordinary," the teacher breathed, walking toward David. "Absolutely extraordinary. Young man, where did you study? Who is your teacher?" David looked down at his hands. "I don't have a teacher, sir. I learned from YouTube videos and by listening to recordings." "That's impossible," Mr. Harrison said, but not in a mean way. He sounded amazed. "The technique, the interpretation, the emotional maturity, that piece is graduate level." "How long have you been playing?" 4 years, sir. "Since I was 8. Mr. Harrison turned to Victoria, his face flushed with excitement. "Mrs. Ashford, this child is a prodigy. A genuine prodigy. I've been teaching for 30 years, and I've never heard anything like this from a 12-year-old. He needs to be evaluated by a conservatory immediately. He needs—" "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," Victoria interrupted, her voice ice cold. "But let's not get carried away. Anyone can memorize a difficult piece with enough time. It's just finger memory, muscle repetition. What Sophie is learning is proper technique, music theory, the foundations that actually matter." The teacher's face fell. "But Mrs. Ashford, with all due respect—" "Sophie," Victoria continued, ignoring him completely. "You see, even children without advantages, without proper schooling, can memorize songs if they work at it. Imagine what you could do if you actually applied yourself. Now let's begin your real lesson. Mr. Harrison, please start with scales." David stood up from the piano bench quickly, like he'd been burned. Sophie was staring at him with an expression Rosa couldn't quite read. Was it anger, jealousy, or something else? "David, you may go to the kitchen now," Victoria said dismissively. "Rosa, I'm sure you have work to do." "Yes, ma'am," Rosa whispered, putting her hand on David's shoulder and guiding him out of the room. They walked down the hallway in silence. When they reached the kitchen, David finally spoke. "She hated it." "No, honey. She heard you. Everyone heard you. She said I just memorized it, like it doesn't count." Rosa knelt down so she was eye level with her son. "Listen to me. What you did in there, that was magic. That teacher knew it. Deep down, Mrs. Ashford knows it too. That's why she's scared." "Scared? Of me? Of what you represent? That talent doesn't care about money or fancy schools. That sometimes the most beautiful things come from unexpected places." David looked at his hands. "Do you think I'll ever get to really play? Like at a concert or something?" Rosa's heart broke a little. "I don't know, baby. I wish I could give you lessons, send you to music school, but we're doing okay, just getting by. My salary here, it keeps us fed and housed. That's what matters." "I know, Mom, I'm not complaining. I know." They sat in the kitchen together, David doing homework while Rosa prepared dinner. Through the walls, they could hear Sophie's lesson continuing. Wrong notes, frustrated sighs, Mr. Harrison's patient voice trying to explain the same concept over and over. Around 5 o'clock, the lesson ended. Rosa heard Mr. Harrison's footsteps coming toward the kitchen. He appeared in the doorway, his coat over his arm. "Mrs. Rivera, may I speak with you for a moment?" Rosa's stomach dropped. Of course, they stepped into the hallway. Mr. Harrison kept his voice low. "Your son is extraordinarily gifted. I don't say this lightly. In my 3 decades of teaching, I've seen maybe 2 or 3 students with that level of natural ability. He needs proper training. He needs opportunities. Mr. Harrison, I appreciate your kindness, but I could teach him," the teacher said quickly, "free of charge. I would consider it an honor." Rosa felt tears prick her eyes. That's incredibly generous, but Mrs. Ashford made her feelings clear. She doesn't want David playing. He's here to motivate Sophie, not to be himself. Mr. Harrison's jaw tightened. I see. May I at least give you my card? If circumstances change or if you find another situation, please contact me. David deserves a chance. Rosa took the card with shaking hands. After Mr. Harrison left, she stood in the hallway, holding that small piece of cardboard like it was made of gold. Back in the grand piano room, Victoria sat alone, staring at the piano. She could still hear the music in her mind. That boy's playing had been transcendent. She'd known it the moment the first note rang out. Everyone in that room had known it, and she'd dismissed it, diminished it, called it mere memorization. Victoria pressed her fingers to her temples. Why had she done that? Why had she felt so angry instead of amazed? Because Sophie, with every advantage money could buy, would never play like that. No amount of expensive lessons or fancy schools would give her what that boy had naturally, and that truth was unbearable. Victoria stood up and walked to the window. Down below, she could see the gardener trimming the hedge. Beyond that, the city stretched out, full of people with their own struggles and dreams. People like Rosa and David working hard, hoping for something better. She turned away from the window. The gala was in 2 weeks. Sophie would perform. Everything would go as planned, and David? David would stay in the kitchen where he belonged. Victoria told herself she believed that. She almost convinced herself it was true. The next 2 weeks fell into a strange pattern. Every other day, Victoria would summon David to Sophie's piano lessons. Each time she'd make him play something difficult while making dismissive comments. Anyone can memorize notes, she'd say. Real musicianship takes years of proper training. But something unexpected was happening. Sophie stopped being angry about the lessons. Instead, she started watching David with curiosity. After the third session, when Victoria left the room to take a phone call, Sophie walked over to where David was gathering his sheet music. "That thing you did with your left hand during the Chopin piece," she said quietly. "Can you show me?" David looked toward the door nervously. "I don't think your grandmother would. She's on the phone with the caterer. She'll be 20 minutes minimum, please. I actually want to learn this time," so David showed her. And Sophie, for the first time in months, actually paid attention. She tried to copy the movement, failed, tried again. When she finally got it right, her face lit up. "I did it. Did you see that?" David smiled. It was the first time he'd smiled in the Ashford mansion in weeks. "You're better than you think. You just need to feel the music, not just play the notes. That's what Mr. Harrison always says, but I never understood what he meant. Here, try this." David played a simple melody with his right hand. "Now close your eyes and imagine something sad, like saying goodbye to someone you love." Sophie closed her eyes and played the same melody. This time it sounded different, softer, more emotional. "That's it," David said. "That's the difference." From that day on, whenever Victoria left them alone even for a moment, Sophie and David would huddle at the piano together. She'd ask questions and he'd answer them. He'd show her techniques he'd learned from videos, and she'd practice them until her fingers hurt. Mr. Harrison noticed the change immediately. "Sophie, you're improving remarkably," he said during one lesson. "Have you been practicing more?" Sophie glanced at David, who was sitting quietly in the corner as usual. "Yeah, I guess I have." Victoria noticed too, but she interpreted it differently. She thought her plan was working, that seeing David's mere memorization was motivating Sophie to work harder with proper technique. She congratulated herself on her cleverness. One afternoon, Rosa was cleaning the hallway outside the music room when she heard laughter. Actual laughter. She peeked through the crack in the door and saw Sophie and David sitting side by side at the piano bench, playing a duet. They were both grinning, fumbling through the notes, trying again when they messed up. Rosa's heart swelled. This was what David needed, a friend. He'd always been so isolated, so alone. At school, the other kids thought he was weird for being obsessed with music. Here, finally, was someone who understood. But Rosa also felt a creeping dread. Victoria wouldn't like this. Wouldn't like them becoming friends. There was a natural order to things in the Ashford mansion, and that order was being disrupted. A week before the gala, Victoria gathered everyone in the music room for what she called a progress review. Sophie was supposed to play her prepared piece, a simple Mozart sonata, to prove she was ready for the performance. Sophie sat at the piano, her hands positioned correctly, her posture perfect. She began to play. The notes were right this time. More than right, they were beautiful. She'd finally found that emotional quality Mr. Harrison had been trying to teach her for months. When she finished, Mr. Harrison actually applauded. Wonderful, Sophie. Truly wonderful. You've made more progress in 2 weeks than in the previous 6 months. Victoria smiled, pleased. You see? I told you my method would work. Seeing what dedication looks like was exactly what she needed. Actually, grandmother, Sophie said, her voice stronger than usual. David has been teaching me during the breaks in our lessons. He's an amazing teacher. The smile froze on Victoria's face. Teaching you? David has no training. He has no business teaching anyone anything. But he's really good at explaining things, Sophie continued, oblivious to the danger. He makes it make sense. And he's been showing me videos of great pianists on his phone, helping me understand interpretation and… That's enough. Victoria cut her off. David is here to demonstrate, not to instruct. Mr. Harrison is your teacher. I pay him a considerable sum for that privilege. I know, but I said that's enough, Sophie. Victoria's voice could have frozen water. She turned to David. You are overstepping your boundaries significantly. David's face went pale. I'm sorry, Mrs. Ashford. Sophie just asked me some questions and You forget your place. Your mother works here. That allows you to be present occasionally. Nothing more. You are not Sophie's peer. You are not her friend. And you are certainly not qualified to teach her anything. The room went completely silent. Rosa, standing by the door, wanted to disappear into the floor. Mr. Harrison looked uncomfortable, studying his shoes. Sophie stood up, her fists clenched. That's not fair. David is twice the pianist I'll ever be, and you know it. Everyone knows it. You're just too proud to admit it. Sophie, go to your room. No, I won't perform at your gala. Not if you're going to treat David like this. Victoria's eyes went cold. You will do as you're told. This conversation is over. David, leave. Rosa, see me in my office in 10 minutes. David practically ran from the room. Rosa followed, her heart pounding. They made it to the kitchen before David's composure cracked. Tears streamed down his face. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to get you in trouble. Shh, it's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. But Rosa's mind was racing. How bad would this be? Would Victoria fire her? They had no savings. No backup plan. 10 minutes later, Rosa knocked on Victoria's office door. Her hands were shaking. Come in. Victoria sat behind her massive desk, papers spread in front of her. She didn't look up for a long moment. When she finally did, her expression was unreadable. Rosa, we need to discuss boundaries. Yes, ma'am. I understand. David won't. I don't want him in this house anymore. When you work, he stays home or finds somewhere else to be. Rosa felt like she'd been punched. Mrs. Ashford, please. He's only 12. I can't afford after-school care and I can't leave him home alone. He's never caused any trouble before. He's a good kid. A good kid who doesn't understand his place. Who thinks he can befriend my granddaughter as if they're equals. They're not equals, Rosa. Surely you understand that. Because he's poor. The words came out before Rosa could stop them. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Because he's the help's son. There's an order to things. A structure. When that structure breaks down, it creates problems. Like today. Rosa took a deep breath, trying to control her anger. David has more musical talent in his little finger than most people have in their whole body. Mr. Harrison said so himself. He's kind, he's smart, and yes, he's poor. But that doesn't make him less than anyone. I'm not saying he's less than anyone. I'm saying there are boundaries that need to be respected. For everyone's sake, including his. You're saying that because it threatens you, Rosa said quietly. That someone like David from nothing could be so gifted. It doesn't fit into your perfect world where money equals worth. The room fell silent. Rosa couldn't believe she'd just said that. She'd definitely be fired now. But somehow she didn't care anymore. Some things needed to be said. Victoria stood up slowly. You're right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Rosa blinked. What? You're right. I saw David's talent that very first day. I knew he was extraordinary, and instead of celebrating it, instead of helping him, I used him as a tool to motivate Sophie. I diminished his gift because it made me uncomfortable. Rosa didn't know what to say. This wasn't what she'd expected. Victoria walked to the window, her back to Rosa. The gala is in 1 week. After that, we'll need to have a longer conversation about David's future. But for now, he can continue coming with you. The ban is lifted. Mrs. Ashford, that's all, Rosa, you can go. Rosa left the office in a daze. Had that really just happened? Had Victoria Ashford actually admitted she was wrong? That evening, Rosa told David about the conversation. She left out the harsh parts, just told him he could come back to the mansion. "Mom," David said quietly, "do you think I'll ever get to really play? Like on a real stage?" Rosa pulled him close. "I don't know, baby. I honestly don't know." But in her pocket was Mr. Harrison's card. And in the back of her mind, a small seed of hope was beginning to grow. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. Maybe David's gift wouldn't stay hidden forever. Or maybe the gala would come and go and everything would go back to how it was. Rich people in their mansions. Poor people cleaning their floors. Only time would tell. The night of the gala arrived with all the excess only the truly wealthy could manage. Ice sculptures melted slowly in the corner of the ballroom. Waiters in crisp white jackets carried trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than Rosa made in a week. Women dripped with diamonds and men checked their phones between conversations, even here, even now. Rosa was working that night, of course. All the staff were. She wore her standard uniform, black pants, white shirt, hair pulled back, invisible among the glamour. David was supposed to be at home watching a movie, staying out of the way. But he wasn't at home. He was hiding in the kitchen with Sophie, who was pacing back and forth in her silver performance dress, looking like she might throw up. "I can't do this," Sophie said for the 10th time. "There are like 200 people out there. What if I mess up? What if I freeze?" "You won't freeze," David said, though he looked nervous too. "You've practiced so much. You know this piece inside and out." Sophie stopped pacing and looked at him. "David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. Do you want to perform tonight?" "Like really perform?" David's eyes went wide. "What?" "No, your grandmother would kill me. She'd fire my mom." "I can't. Just answer the question." "If you could, would you want to?" David was quiet for a long moment. "More than anything," he finally whispered. "Playing for real people on a real stage, not just for myself in an empty room?" "Yeah, I'd want that." Sophie nodded slowly like she'd made a decision. "Then that's what's going to happen." "Sophie, no. Whatever you're thinking, listen to me. You're the most talented person I've ever met. You've been teaching yourself for 4 years from YouTube videos. And you play better than people who've studied their whole lives. That's not normal. That's special, and you deserve to be heard. But your grandmother, my grandmother, is wrong, and I'm going to prove it." Before David could argue more, Sophie marched out of the kitchen. David sat there, his heart pounding, having no idea what she was planning. Victoria was holding court near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. The mayor was there, the Hendersons, the Blackwells, everyone who mattered in the city. She wore a navy gown that probably cost more than a car, and she moved through the crowd like a queen among subjects. Everything was perfect, exactly as she'd planned. The dinner was served, some fancy French thing with too many courses. Speeches were made about charity and giving back. The kind of speeches rich people gave before writing checks to make themselves feel better. Victoria gave one herself, talking about the importance of supporting the arts and education. Then it was time for the entertainment portion of the evening. Victoria stepped up to the microphone, champagne glass in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce my granddaughter Sophie, who will be performing for us tonight." Applause filled the room. Victoria beamed. This was her moment. Proof that her methods worked, that her granddaughter could shine among the elite. Sophie walked onto the small stage they'd set up. The spotlight hit her, making her dress sparkle. She looked small up there, young and vulnerable. She reached the microphone and adjusted it downward. Then she didn't sit at the piano. She just stood there. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Sophie said, her voice shaking slightly. "My grandmother asked me to perform a Mozart sonata for you this evening." Victoria nodded approvingly from her seat at the front table. "But I'm not going to do that," Sophie continued. The room went still. Victoria's smile faltered. "Instead, I'd like to introduce you to someone truly special, someone who has more musical talent than I could ever dream of having, someone who taught himself to play piano from YouTube videos because he couldn't afford lessons. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend David Rivera." The ballroom erupted in confused murmurs. Victoria stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. But it was too late. David was already walking out from behind the stage curtain looking absolutely terrified. He wore the same outfit he'd worn to the lessons, his too small khaki pants and white polo shirt. His shoes were scuffed. Next to all these people in their designer clothes and jewelry, he looked painfully out of place. Rosa, standing by the wall with the other staff, felt her blood turn to ice. What was happening? This couldn't be happening. Sophie, what is the meaning of this? Victoria's voice cut through the noise, but Sophie had already stepped away from the microphone. David stood in front of the grand piano, his hands shaking so badly he had to clasp them together. 200 pairs of eyes stared at him. He could hear whispers. Who is that? The help's son? This is inappropriate. He looked out into the crowd and found his mother's face. She looked terrified. Then he found Sophie standing at the side of the stage, giving him a thumbs up. He sat down at the piano. For a moment, nothing happened. The room held its breath. Then David's fingers touched the keys and everything changed. He played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, third movement. It was one of the most technically demanding pieces in classical piano. Fast, aggressive, passionate. His fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision. The notes came crashing out like a storm, filling every corner of the massive ballroom. People stopped whispering. Phones came out recording. A woman in the front row had tears streaming down her face. The mayor leaned forward in his seat, mouth open. David poured everything into that piano. Every hour he'd spent teaching himself. Every moment of frustration, every time someone told him to know his place. It all came out through his fingers. The music was angry and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. When he played the final dramatic chords, the silence that followed felt like the world had stopped spinning. Then someone started clapping. Slow at first, then faster. Then another person joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet, applauding so loudly it sounded like thunder. Bravo! Someone shouted. Bravo! An older man with an accent pushed his way to the front. He was wearing an expensive suit and had wild gray hair. Young man, he said loudly, how long have you been playing? David's voice was barely a whisper. 4 years, sir. The man turned to the crowd. 4 years? Self-taught. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Antonio Marchesi. I am the director of the Greenwood Conservatory. And in 40 years of music education, I have never heard anything like what this child just did. More applause. More shouting. People were pulling out their phones, texting, making calls. Mr. Harrison, Sophie's piano teacher, was crying openly. Victoria stood frozen in place, her face completely white. People were looking at her now, not with admiration, but with questions in their eyes. How had she not known about this boy? How had this talent been hidden in her own house? Antonio Marchesi was still talking. This boy needs proper training. He needs opportunities. He is a prodigy, a genuine prodigy. If there is anyone in this room who cares about music, about art, about nurturing true talent, this boy must be given a chance. A woman Victoria recognized as the president of the Philharmonic stood up. I'll fund his education, she said. Full scholarship wherever he wants to study. The conservatory would be honored to have him, Marchesi added. Room, board, everything. He just needs to accept. David sat at the piano, completely overwhelmed. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to kids like him. Rosa had tears pouring down her face. Other staff members were patting her on the back, congratulating her. She couldn't speak, couldn't think. Her son, her beautiful, talented son, was being seen, finally seen. Sophie ran onto the stage and hugged David. I told you, she whispered. I told you that you deserved to be heard. Victoria finally moved. She walked up to the stage, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Everyone went quiet, waiting to see what she would do. Would she be angry? Would she throw them out? She looked at David for a long moment. Then she looked at her granddaughter. Then out at the crowd of people who had witnessed something extraordinary. David, she said quietly so only he could hear, I owe you an apology. But that apology would have to wait. People were crowding around wanting to shake David's hand, to get his name, to talk about opportunities. Antonio Marchesi was already talking about auditions and curriculum. Rosa pushed through the crowd to reach her son. When she got to him, she pulled him into a fierce hug. Mom, did that really just happen? David whispered. Yes, baby, it really just happened. The gala continued, but nobody was talking about the charity anymore. They were talking about the 12-year-old boy who played like an angel. Videos of his performance were already spreading online, and Victoria Ashford stood at the edge of the crowd, watching her perfectly planned evening spiral into something she couldn't control, realizing that some things were bigger than money, bigger than social order, bigger than pride. Talent couldn't be contained. Truth couldn't be hidden forever. And sometimes the most extraordinary things came from the most unexpected places. The gala eventually ended, but Victoria didn't sleep that night. She sat in her study, still wearing her navy gown, staring at nothing. Her phone kept buzzing with messages, praise for the evening, questions about the remarkable young pianist, requests for his contact information. She'd built her whole life on control, on knowing her place in the world and making sure everyone else knew theirs too. But tonight had shattered that illusion completely. Around 3 a.m, her husband found her there. Richard had been quiet during the gala, watching everything unfold without interfering. He was like that, steady, thoughtful, content to let Victoria run their social life while he managed their business interests. "You haven't moved in hours," he said gently, sitting in the chair across from her. "I heard him play that first day," Victoria said, her voice hollow. "When I walked in and found him at the piano, I knew immediately that he was extraordinary. And instead of helping him, instead of celebrating that gift, I used him to make Sophie feel small. I diminished him because his talent threatened me." "Why did it threaten you?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "Because Sophie has had every advantage money can buy. The best teachers, the best instruments, all the time in the world to practice, and she's mediocre at best. Then here's this boy from nothing, teaching himself from internet videos, and he plays like he was touched by God. What does that say about everything I believe in? That money isn't everything?" Richard suggested quietly. "That money isn't anything," Victoria corrected. "Not when it comes to things that actually matter. Talent, kindness, courage, you can't buy those. Sophie showed more courage tonight than I've shown in my entire life." Richard reached over and took his wife's hand. "So what are you going to do about it?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, but I need to start by apologizing, really apologizing." The next morning, Victoria asked Rosa to bring David to her office. Rosa looked terrified, probably expecting to be fired after the chaos of last night. David looked exhausted but also different somehow, like he was walking a little taller. They sat across from Victoria's desk, holding hands. "Mother and son united against whatever was coming. I owe both of you an apology," Victoria began. Her voice was steady but soft. "David, I saw your gift from the very beginning, and instead of nurturing it, instead of helping you, I used you as a tool to motivate my granddaughter. I diminished your talent because it made me uncomfortable. That was cruel and unforgivable." David shifted in his seat, not knowing what to say. "You played something beautiful into this world despite having every reason not to. Despite being told in 1,000 small ways that you didn't matter. And last night you gave me something I didn't deserve. You showed me who I'd become. You held up a mirror and I didn't like what I saw." Rosa squeezed David's hand tighter. Victoria opened her desk drawer and pulled out a folder. "Antonio Marchese called me this morning. The Greenwood Conservatory wants to offer you a full scholarship. Tuition, room, board, everything. You'd live on campus during the week and come home on weekends." David's eyes went wide. That's a real offer?" "It's very real. But there's more." Victoria slid the folder across the desk. "I've set up a trust fund in your name. It will cover any expenses beyond what the scholarship provides. Music, books, travel to performances, whatever you need. And when you're ready for university or to pursue professional performance, that funding will continue." Rosa opened the folder with shaking hands. She looked at the numbers and her face went completely white. "Mrs. Ashford, this is too much." "It's not nearly enough," Victoria said, "but it's a start. Additionally, your salary is being doubled, Rosa, and your hours reduced. You'll work 30 hours a week instead of 50. That way you can attend David's performances, be there for him as he grows." Tears were streaming down Rosa's face now. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I was wrong. Because talent like David's comes along once in a generation, and I almost crushed it out of spite. Because your son deserves every opportunity in the world and I have the means to help provide them." Victoria paused. "And because I want to be better than I was. I want to be someone Sophie can be proud of." David finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Mrs. Ashford, I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept. Say you'll take this chance and become everything you're meant to be. That's all I ask." David looked at his mother. Rosa nodded through her tears. "It's your choice, baby. But this is your dream. I accept, David said, and then he started crying too. Thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria stood and walked around the desk. For a moment she hesitated, then she held out her hand to David. He took it and she pulled him into a hug. Thank you, she whispered, for your music, for your grace, and for forgiving me when I don't deserve it. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. David started at the Greenwood Conservatory and loved it. He had real teachers now, people who understood his gift and pushed him to grow. He practiced on world-class pianos and studied with other talented students. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel weird or different. He felt like he belonged. Sophie visited him on campus twice, bringing cookies her chef had made. They'd sit in the practice rooms and play together, and David would show her what he was learning. Their friendship, born in secret, was now out in the open. Rosa had more time to breathe. With better pay and fewer hours, she could actually see her son's performances. She sat in the audience at his first official recital and cried through the whole thing. Not sad tears, but tears of joy and relief and gratitude. Victoria attended too, sitting quietly in the back. She didn't want to make a scene or draw attention. She just wanted to hear David play. Afterward, when people were congratulating him, David saw her and waved. She waved back, a small gesture that meant everything. But Victoria's transformation went beyond David. She started a scholarship program called Hidden Talents, designed to find and support kids from low-income families who showed exceptional ability in any field: music, art, science, writing, anything. She partnered with schools in struggling neighborhoods, provided funding for teachers and equipment, created pathways to opportunities these kids would never have had otherwise. Sophie became involved too, volunteering with the program, using her privilege to open doors for others. The girl who'd once hated piano now loved it because she finally understood what it was for, not to show off, but to connect, to express, to share something beautiful with the world. 6 months after the gala, David performed at a prestigious youth competition. He played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, backed by a full orchestra. The performance was breathtaking. He won first place. In the audience, Rosa sat between Victoria and Richard. When David took his bow, all three of them stood and applauded until their hands hurt. After the performance, a reporter asked David how it felt to go from teaching himself in secret to performing with an orchestra. David thought for a moment. I always had the music inside me, he said. I just needed someone to believe it was worth hearing. I'm grateful every day that I got that chance, the reporter turned to Victoria. Mrs. Ashford, you've become quite the advocate for young musicians. What inspired that change? Victoria looked at David, then at Rosa, then at Sophie standing beside her. I learned that the most valuable things in life can't be bought, she said. And that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. A young man taught me that. He taught me that talent doesn't care about money or status. That genius can bloom anywhere, even in the corners we're not looking. And that our job, those of us with resources, isn't to hoard opportunities. It's to create them for everyone. That evening, as the sun set over the city, David sat at the piano in his dorm room, not practicing for a performance or preparing for an exam, just playing for himself for the pure joy of it. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. You are amazing today. I'm so proud to know you. Then one from his mom. My beautiful boy. Your father would be so proud. And one from Victoria. Thank you for the music. Thank you for the lesson. Thank you for giving an old woman a chance to be better. David smiled and went back to playing. The melody drifted out his window and into the night, a gift to anyone who cared to listen. Because that's what music was. A gift. And David Rivera, the boy who'd once hidden in empty rooms to play piano, was finally free to share his gift with the world. Some stories end with everything going back to normal, but this story ended with everything becoming new. With pride transformed into humility, with barriers broken down, with talent recognized and nurtured regardless of where it came from, and with one simple truth that Victoria Ashford would carry for the rest of her life. The most extraordinary people are often right in front of us, if only we have the eyes to see them and the courage to lift them up.